Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now today we're going to be returning back to the wonderful new legislation coming out for the EU in the form of DORA and NIS2. This is something that is definitely of interest to the wider community. It's something that we've had questions about before. Obviously, we've covered it a fair bit with Mr. Paul Dwyer, but today I want to get another perspective into this as well. So we've brought in David Cassidy, a legend in the community, to kind of sit down and talk to us about his views, his thoughts, and his opinions on both NIS2 and DORA. I'm here today to talk about NIS2 and DORA. I have the fantastic Richard Cassidy. Richard, absolute pleasure for you to be back to talk to us. Obviously, this is a big thing that's coming in next year, for DORA, NIS2, and there's a lot of regulation that's kind of occurring all around the world with InfoSec. It's kind of heartening, but yeah, what are your thoughts? What are your initial thoughts on DORA and NIS2? Is it well timed that we have this kind of thing? Do you think it's going to be a big game changer? Where do you think we're going to see this going in the next sort of like 6 months? Because it comes in January next year.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I have to say is I am genuinely surprised and somewhat shocked at the level of unpreparedness that I'm seeing with the organizations I'm talking to. And I genuinely, I've sat, with CISOs from, organizations in finance, literally across Europe, and there are very few that have a handle on DORA specifically in finance. NIS2, less of a challenge. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but even still, a lot of organizations are behind the curve. And it would appear then also that it's a result of the big consultancies. They don't really appear to have a journey capability to take organizations on in terms of gap analysis and getting you to the levels you need to be at to kind of pass the ESA regulation questions when they come knocking on the door for DORA, and then from a NIS2 perspective as well. And so there's a lot of disparity in the industry. And this isn't my view, this is what I'm seeing. So it's actually, from the coalface, from the CISO I'm talking to. So that's the first challenge. The industry's behind the curve on getting here, which is interesting because NIS2 says October this year, you have to be in a position where you can demonstrate what your journey to maturity looks like, okay? There's still going to be a period of time for organizations to kind of fully align to NIS2. And DORA, it's January 25, but again, that's demonstrating that you have a plan, you are able to show how you're going to meet the requirements, and then you'll have a window of opportunity whilst the ESAs get their acts together on deciding how they're going to assess this downstream, which is probably a period of about 12 to 18 months in my experience. I mean, look at GDPR and others. So that's kind of where we're at. In terms of the regulations and the directives, I think it's a good move. If you look at some of the old regulations, we'll talk about PCI as an example, even GDPR. There was a lot of kind of stick-based management of you must adhere to these or else, these are the outcomes. And organizations really just went about a checkbox exercise, traditional kind of audit, mentality. And the outcomes, I mean, PCI it does have very good functional and tangible outcomes. So I don't mean that so much, and GDPR does too. But what NIS2 and DORA are saying is, we want you to expect the worst case in terms of the types of cyber threats you're going to see or operational outages and resilience challenges in your business. And we want you to demonstrate that you can get to a point of operational recovery within a very short period of time. And there hasn't been a regulation across finance and the wider industry that once you get to the end of it, you've got some real tangible cybersecurity, cyber resilience outcomes. So I actually think it's a positive step in the right direction. And organizations will benefit from following NIS2 and DORA as it applies to them.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, being a QSA myself, I can attest, PCI, I've been doing auditing now for years and years and years, and it is viewed very much by the people conducting it as a tick box. And it's always frustrated me because, functionally, obviously it's focused on credit card information, the protection of credit card information, but there's some pretty good stuff in there that you can adopt in pretty much any kind of situation. And there's a lot of crossover with ISO 27001. But what I like about DORA is what they're not demanding that you have. They're saying, no, it's more of a kind of, you need to consider risk. You need to understand your risks. You need to be able to handle incidents that come along. It's broad enough to kind of allow you to adopt a security posture that works for you and your organization without forcing you down a route where it becomes a tick box exercise. I mean, and to kind of further what you've said, I've only just started seeing, we're a consultancy, so we deal with all kinds of customers on all different kinds of levels, be it PCI DSS, be it ISO 27001, and I'm only just starting to see people really discussing DORA and coming to us and asking, okay, what do we need to do with DORA? Could you come in and help us out? And we've got some pretty good engagement with a couple of decent sized organizations on this. But it does seem to be a lot less than I would have expected. I was speaking with another colleague of mine who's come on the podcast, Paul Dwyer. He's over in Ireland, really, really big on DORA. And he's getting a lot of people who are coming to him for training and, advising them on kind of where they need to start. But it's almost like in the UK, we're just not really that interested. He's in Ireland, so obviously he's part of the European Union, and it's in their interest to do that. But here, I don't know. I heard nothing about it really at ISO, where normally all the marketing people are out in force going, buy our product and we'll protect you, with DORA and all the rest of it. But it's surprising how little we're getting. As I said, there's a bit going on. Not as much as I would have thought.
Yeah, I look, that's a valid point. And let's maybe delve into DORA a little bit more deeply. Look, I appreciate for the UK listeners, they may find this is less interesting, but actually the PRA are drawing a lot of similarities to the Prudential Regulations Authority on what the goodness from DORA is making its way into parts of PRA. And in some respects, I think the PRA is slightly ahead in some of the definitions of what good looks like in terms of minimum viable operations. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But from a DORA perspective, what you can't fall into the trap of, I'm a UK-based entity of business, it doesn't apply to me. That is true if you only transact within the United Kingdom and Crown dependency countries. If you have a subsidiary and there's transactions from the UK into the EU, you can be held accountable, and it's likely there will be examples of this to show how you meet the DORA regulation functions, or in this case, articles and chapters. And so you do have to consider what your business operations look like. If there are EU transactions and EU subsidiaries, then you're going to get hit by DORA. And so let's talk a little bit more about that then. So the EU reckons there's about 22,000 companies across all financial sectors that will be affected. And as I said, UK financial entities will need to assure compliance capability to transact within the EU. But what's interesting with DORA is it really ups the ante on the fines. Now, I don't want to make this a scaremongering section of the podcast, but people need to really understand this, because I don't think people are taking note here. So the standard fines are up to 10 million euro, okay? And that's not too dissimilar to what we're seeing in other regulations. However, it's the third-party cost fines that you could be liable for that could potentially cause significant financial impact, if not terminal financial impact to a business. And what that means is consumers themselves, if they're impacted, can make claims against a failure to reach compliance with DORA regulation if it led to or resulted in a breach or a leak of their data. And if there are third parties that are impacted as a result of something that occurred because by not complying with DORA regulations, then you're also liable to third party costs. And so, therefore, how big can the fines be? The answer is, how long is a piece of string? So this is something you really have to take seriously, and don't just think if you sit in the UK, you're good, fold your arms and away you go. Really introspect at how your business operates, because my goodness, if you miss just one aspect of your organization that transacts in the EU, you could find yourself falling foul and some big fines. So that's the really, really critical piece, is think about where these fines are going to be and the potential cost of these fines.
I think what also interests me as well is there's a big onus now on the C-suite to take control and the ownership of the organization to take control of security, which, previous compliance, like in PCI, there's a section in there around making sure that the C-suite, the people at the top, the board, take ownership and responsibility of security and PCI. With DORA, it's the same thing, but they're actually saying, no, if you really don't do it, you guys will be personally held liable as well. It's not just a fine for the organization. There's also some dire outcomes if they find you were very negligent. And we're starting to see some of that with SolarWinds and the SEC kind of starting to point at the CISOs. So it's not just DORA we're seeing this in, we're seeing it in other areas. But, what have they said? I mean, just for those who are listening, I mean, what have they said about the C-suite? If you really, really don't deal with security properly, what could feasibly happen to you?
Yeah, so it's something you'll have to read in detail to get the real kind of juicy information, but let's put it at a high level. So this is the first regulation that is hyper-specific on who owns what parts of the regulation, and it extends from financial-based fines to restrictions on business operations and transactions, to worst-case custodial sentences for those executives that own their respective parts of DORA in terms of outcomes that have been negligent or haven't met them on the basis of, hopefully that nobody will ever plead ignorance, but you can't say, I didn't know, Your Honor. That's not going to wash. And so it's the first time we're seeing custodial sentences written as a potential outcome in a regulation like this. And that's quite impactful. That's quite serious.
It is. And I think it's going to scare the bejesus out of a lot of people. Let's be honest. And I think it's great from an InfoSec perspective, because a lot of us have now been saying for many, many years, can you please start taking InfoSec seriously, or cybersecurity, or whatever bloody hell you want to call it these days. It's called all kinds of different things. I'm a bit old school. And trying to get ownership of risk from the C-suite has always been a bit of a tough one, because nobody wants to accept ownership. And it's been the case that a lot of InfoSec people, CISOs, managers, whatever it's been over that time, have always been kind of pointed at when things go wrong. So, well, you didn't do your job properly. And I know a lot of people who said, well, you didn't give me the chance. You didn't give me the budget. You didn't give me the support. So what do you want me to do? I can't secure an environment without any support whatsoever. And we've been banging that kind of drum for a long time, saying, no, C-suite, you need to help us out. You need to get us involved, and you need to support us in this. And I see this as a positive step forward to getting that kind of support, because it's just a shame that it's been forced. You would have thought that people would have been, the management of an organization would have been interested in securing their environment and protecting it from bad things happening to it.
Yeah. And just to add to that, James, I mean, if I were a CISO and a CIO at an organization that is impacted by DORA, my goodness, I would be documenting every conversation about how I get in alignment, my request to the board for additional resources or budget to fill the gaps or bridge the gaps, so that, God forbid, that there is a material breach, that there is mitigating circumstances. And I really think CISOs need to, and CIOs need to pay attention to that, and CEOs as well, because I do see a lot of test cases coming, and I don't think we'll see them really till the very beginning of 26. I hope that's the earliest. It could be earlier, but it's all about covering your back, accountability, documenting your requests, and showing that you desperately tried to bridge the gap. because businesses love scapegoats in times of regulation failures, and I don't want the CISO CIO to become yet another victim of board level decisions that don't support this. So it's a great point, and it's something I really want C-level suite to take note of.
Well, I think the other thing to consider as well is just to add to that. I think you're going to see in Europe, the European Union, a lot more CISOs being put on the board because there's going to be that mentality of, well, to protect the rest of the board members if the CISO isn't doing the job properly, or and suddenly we get a fine, you're pulling them into that potential for kind of custodial sentences, that kind of thing. If they're not part of the C-suite, then it's going to be much harder to kind of point the finger at them. So I think you're going to see a lot more entrance to the C-suite. But what's your opinion on, we're kind of going off a bit of a tangent here, but if CISOs are being pulled in Europe, in the European Union, to boards where the potential and risk for them to be pointed at in the event of a breach, isn't that going to drive up the price of CISOs? Aren't CISOs going to command a hell of a lot higher? Because if they're taking the risk of being put in prison if the rest of the company doesn't do what it says on the tin, isn't that going to drive up the cost of just getting the bodies in to perform that function?
Yeah, but it's a great point. I believe the current figures, if you look at various resources, are anywhere between 20 to 28% of CISOs have a board level representation. Interestingly enough, I see a lot of CISOs reporting to the board through the CFO. I'm not sure if that's conducive to where we need to be from a regulatory perspective, and even from a wider business alignment to cybersecurity resilience. But they're the figures, and that's quite bleak because of just how critical the CISO function is. And to your point, CISOs that are able to communicate at board level it's a growing trend. Most CISOs, you're either a strategist or you're a technocrat or you're a business analyst type CISO. There's lots of different personas. There are a few that have the confidence and I suppose expertise and experience to adequately and eloquently communicate to the board. And so when you do find those CISOs, then that's going to drive up the cost. But I think that's rightly so. And I think it's about time CISOs got represented and recognized in the way that, based upon the onus that they have for overall business cyber resilience and cybersecurity. It's a huge remit, and actually my view on this is that the CIO will eventually be replaced by the CISO role. I don't know if the CIO traditionally is going to survive. I think the Chief Information Security Officer will indeed be that person. Could be wrong, but I am seeing more of a trend to that in a lot of the organizations I'm talking to.
And of course, being a CISO yourself, you're very supportive of the increase in monetary recompense.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't.
But this is it. I mean, the thing I think a lot of people outside the industry need to understand is, you don't get into InfoSec for the money. I mean, okay, it's a good, solid job. And the money is good in this space. But you do it because you genuinely care a lot of the times. Okay, we've got some of the egotistical weirdos that every environment has, every business sector has, But as a general rule, there's a big need and want to protect the environments they're there to look after. And I think having things like DORA and NIS2 really kind of pushes us to be able to make some real change. Okay, you're going to get the CISOs who are a bit overzealous, who start buying in products all over the place, driving up the expenditure of security. But you've also got a hell of a lot who, for many, many years have had to literally perform security with £5 of pickled egg, and if you're lucky, a half a pint of beer. And watch the CIO wander off with his 25 million quid, or his or her 25 million quid, and you end up with like 100,000. And of course, as I've said before, a good GRC tool will pretty much wipe out most CISOs' budgets.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think CISOs need to get more confident about the metrics they report upstream. There's lots of different examples out there of what kind of metrics you should care about as a CISO. The data is one example. Financial assets, of course, your human assets are people, your supply chain, infrastructure. IoT is a big one, which we need to talk more about. Enterprise apps, and then you test the security posture, and then more importantly, what I've seen a lot a shift towards recently is incident detection response. And this is really interesting because what DORA and NIS2 are saying is you need to be aware of the threat vectors that you're up against, right? The ICT risk management profile. And they're asking you to take note of, understand your business, understand your risks, and take more of a threat-led posture assessment about it and build an ecosystem around it. It's great to see finally regulations that aren't saying, tick this box, deploy this technology, deploy that technology. Yeah. And in fact, interestingly, DORA doesn't really talk about the technology stack. By the way, NIS2 does to more of an extent. But what's interesting about DORA is I did a bit of homework on, because what I try to do is simplify when I speak to my counterparts at organizations I speak to, is simplify what's the technology stack you would need. And the reason I do that, because I don't want to contradict myself, let's not look at tools technology, is I want these CISOs to understand that they actually have, they're most of the way there. This big, worry that, oh my goodness, DORA is a forklift upgrade of the capabilities that we need to have. I don't think that's the case. And, give an example, the kind of technologies you'd be looking at that would get you out of the starting gates around DORA, things like user entity behavior analytics, endpoint detection response, security information event management, network traffic analysis, identity access management, data access governance, DLP, security service, access, edge gateways, vulnerability management, SOAR. Right. I don't think I'm mentioning a single technology there that every organization does or doesn't already have in some form or another. And of course, DORA at its core in chapter 4 is all about backup recovery and resilience testing. And, there aren't many organizations that don't have some capabilities there. Whether they're the type of capabilities DORA wants is something that you need to look at. But there's the thing. Don't be looking at this, head in your hands and worried that you haven't got the stack. You most likely do have the capabilities. Now you've just got to understand how you go about aligning to DORA. And let me just talk about that briefly. I think the worst way to approach it, and I've been to organizations that have told me, no, this is the way, and I've advised against it because I don't think it serves the outcomes, but they've done it anyway. And what they're doing is they're looking at all of the chapters of DORA, right? So chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And they're going through article by article, sub-article by sub-article, and then testing their alignment to each one of those. And I think that is one of the most complex ways to approach DORA alignment. It will be far more effective to look at the DORA domain levels, and there's only 5 of them. And the beauty of doing it this way, that is if you're impacted by NIS2, you're going to find there's a lot of overlap between NIS2 and DORA. And there are 5 key domains in DORA, right? ICT risk management framework, ICT incident management, digital operation resilience testing, management of ICT third-party risks, information sharing arrangements. And so you look at those and go, right, what do I have there? What's my current ICT risk management framework? What have I got? What are my capabilities? And you ask that. So you do almost like a maturity analysis of your capabilities in each of those areas. And that's going to give you a heat map of where your biggest weaknesses lie, and then where you need to go into more detail. I think going line by line is possibly the longest, most convoluted way to do it. Do it at a domain level first, look at a maturity assessment, do almost like a heat map analysis, and then work on each of those areas that are red in terms of lack of alignment. And you'll find you're going to work your way to a much better capability around DORA. So a bit of a long diatribe there, but that would be what I would suggest. And I've seen that work. Okay, it's not something I say. I've seen organizations approach it that way, and they get the best out of the DORA alignment project.
No, I totally agree. I mean, DORA is, I've read through the directives and I know that they're still changing some of them at the moment. There's another batch coming out relatively soon. And it's not a standard that you can just sit there and kind of go, yeah, we're aligned to that. We're aligned to that. I mean, for us, when we're kind of going into organizations and looking at it, we look at, the organization from the intent behind DORA, what the intentions are for each of those sections within DORA. And one of the interesting things I've noticed is an increasing shift with DORA and NIS2 and a number of other areas as well towards proactive security rather than reactive. I mean, yeah, okay, the incident response piece is in there and it will always be in there. It's a very important part. You can't be 100% secure. But understanding what your vulnerabilities are at any one time, I'm seeing, I'm having a lot of discussions about snapshot in time pen tests at the moment and continuous pen testing. Because, your snapshot in time is great for that short period of time, sort of like after you receive that, that report. But if you wait 2 or 3 months, boom, it's going to be a very different thing. So there's a lot more vulnerability management and understanding because one of my biggest frustrations being a QSA is I go into a lot of organizations and I see that they have things like vulnerability management and vulnerability scanners, but nobody ever looks at the bloody results. So why have you got it? You've bought this solution, you're not utilizing it, you're not looking at the output and going, we've got some significant vulnerability because we haven't put in this patch for this particular set of operating systems or whatever. And what I do love about NIS and DORA is, there is this, what I got from it is there's this big move towards understand your risks, know what your environment looks like, do your defense in depth. I mean, the intent behind it is obviously have good defense in depth and have good reactive, procedures to deal with that. But you've got to understand your environment as well. You can't just go in and put, I don't know, endpoint security, some email security and say, yeah, we've covered all of our bases, because that's obviously not the case.
Yeah. And actually DORA doesn't allow you to not be ahead of the game in terms of assessment, continuous improvement assessment. So specifically in chapter 4, so articles 22, 23, 24, 25 shows you how sad I am in terms of my knowledge of DORA, but they're all about performance of digital operation resilience testing of your ICT tools and systems, advanced testing of ICT tools, threat-led pen testing, and so on and so forth. And they even define the requirements for testers. So you're not going to get out of jail free cards and say, well, I've got it, but I don't need to prove that it's operationally effective. DORA is making you prove it. It's making you test your systems regularly. It's making you prove that you can get to minimum viable operations, which is really what the crux of DORA is mostly about. Why did it come about, right? Let's give the listeners an example. So Barclays Bank, as an example, if Barclays Bank were to be disrupted operationally, they currently handle around 30% of the UK's economy, all right, in terms of all the transactions they handle. The UK government can't have a bank that takes 30% of the UK's economy down for minutes, let alone hours, let alone days or weeks. And it's a similar story with major Irish banks, major European banks. I say European, Irish is European, but other countries in Europe. And so DORA was there to say, we can't suffer these outages and we need these organizations to get ahead of the curve in terms of making sure they can recover when a security incident and also operational failures occur. So this is a good step, and it's going to put pressure on organizations, but I think it's the right kind of pressure because you get tangible outcomes, and that's what it's all about. It's about making sure that countries can transact, and we don't lose our ability to get paid our salary. God forbid, the outage happens on payday. That would be disastrous for lots of people. So it's a great step in the right direction, and I think organizations should look at it positively. And by the way, PRA has very similar requirements. So for the UK listeners listening to this, PRA also talks about important business services and critical third parties and making sure you're testing your ability to recover important business services, whereas DORA calls it minimum viable operations. So there's a lot of similarities.
It'd be like the whole GDPR thing, though, isn't it? The UK is going to pretty much adopt everything that comes in from that legislation, and it makes sense to do that. Something that you mentioned a lot earlier in this conversation was the whole third party thing. And one of the biggest concerns that I have is our whole kind of digital economy or digital operations, really, is probably a better way to describe it, is serviced by some significant third parties these days, ever more than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. 10, 15 years ago, it was all software packages and data centers that maybe you procured data center space, whatever. but it was all yours to manage. There wasn't really much in the way of SaaS. And then obviously virtualization came along in the cloud and everybody started migrating out because it was cheaper to do so. And recently we've seen significant problems all over Europe, all over the world, really, where a third party has been compromised. The company who are experiencing the loss isn't actually the one that caused the issue. It was a third party that was facilitating them. Not mentioning any company names, but I think we all know who some of the more recent ones are. And I think it's important to remember that, things like DORA, for instance, are financial sector specific, but it also does cater for those third parties who facilitate into that sector as well. You can't just go, well, we're a data center company, so I don't care. You actually do have to do something and facilitate, because it's not just, the financial companies that are going to get affected, it's you. And the other thing is I can see a lot more changes to contracts as well. A lot more changes.
Okay, you've raised two fantastic points there. So let's deal with the first one, third parties. Yeah, if you're a service provider into a financial institution that has operations in the EU, you have to also demonstrate how you align to the DORA regulation principles. So you're not off the hook. And I don't feel a lot of third parties have really understood that. At least not the ones that I've spoken to that provide threat detection services, financial payment services into these core financial businesses, insurance, hedge funds, these sorts of things. So absolutely right. Assess whether you as a third party provide service to the financial sector in the EU. And if you do, you are just as much on the hook for aligned to DORA. Now let's talk about contracts. My goodness. So I was at an event in Sweden, and one of the ladies that came along was one of the lawyers for the European Union and an advisor around the DORA regulation.
Okay.
And she raised a big concern. And this was back in October of last year. So a reasonable while ago. She said the average contract renegotiation process, takes anywhere between 8 to 12 months, in some cases longer. And I've been at organizations that have just started that process last month. And if we look at the deadline that's looming, that is cutting it fine to renegotiate the contracts, to have exit clauses for when organizations don't meet DORA regulation alignment needs. And that's a big challenge. Forget about the technology alignment, making sure I can do this technically and that I've got the right processes in place. And, the contractual element is going to be one that bites people hard. And that's where I'd be starting. I'd be immediately pressing the button on that. As much as I would want to be pressing the button on aligning to DORA. So such a good point. And businesses are not understanding just how long it takes to get there.
Well, this leads to another point. I've always said to my customers, whenever you take a third party on, always have that clause in that contract for the right to audit. Don't just expect, don't if they're telling you that they're secure, don't just take it as read that they're secure, because everybody's going to tell you that. They don't want to lose the sale. Of course, they're going to tell you that. But with the right to audit in that clause, you've got the ability to turn around and say, right, prove it. Prove to us that you are secure, because otherwise you're going to be in breach of contract. I see this sort of change with NIS and DORA to really enforce that clause in those contracts. Not only, obviously, I mean, you mentioned before about the renegotiation of contracts. Yeah, it takes ages and ages and ages, but we're going to see clauses for fines. We're going to see clauses for right to audit. The third party market in InfoSec is going to suddenly become a really, really kind of big space to really concentrate on in your defense in depth. Okay, I've checked my endpoints, they're all cool. I've done my instant response. I've got my governance. I've got my policy sets and procedures, and done all my training and all the other cool technologies that I've got in place to protect my environment. Wait a minute, what's going on with the third-party guys who are managing our servers? They've got the virtual cloud. I know I'm doing my bit. Now I need to look at them and whether or not they're doing their bit, and get them to prove it as well.
I just wonder how far down the supply chain this goes. And
a lot.
As an example, let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? The recent breach of a big data vendor as a result of, questionable policies and controls. I forget them. Talk about one of the biggest software providers in the world, and has been since Bill Gates founded them. What I often wonder, because if I look at DORA, it tends to talk about third parties as suppliers of services, but I don't see enough verbiage around software vendors like Microsoft, like whoever it is, right? I don't want to name all the software vendors. If they fail in their ability, or and they don't even at the moment, this is the challenge. They don't have regulation that says if you fail in your dynamic application security testing or secure coding practices life cycle, then you're accountable. That, like we said in previous podcasts, they can almost go, look, I'm really sorry, and and you're left to pick up the pieces of the explosion that's happened to your organization. I just wonder if we're going to see some test cases with DORA where they're going to say, no, this happened as a result of something that this vendor didn't do, and it was something in their code that was a material failure that led to the whatever it happens. Therefore, I think they should be liable. And I dare say there's going to be a lot of support for that. And I think the big vendors need to pay really close attention to their chain of liability and ownership in DORA.
That's an interesting one. That is an interesting one. If the operating system provider has a 0-day vulnerability that they don't fix within a reasonable, what would be considered a reasonable timescale, and I mean, it's happened recently. A ransomware bunch took advantage of that 0-day before that particular OS vendor, who shall remain nameless, but has already been mentioned. So screw it, it's Microsoft. And they took advantage faster than Microsoft could provide a fix for, which, we've seen in the past. But does it bring them into liability? Because if you're a financial institution and you suddenly find that you have been compromised by, let's just say, ransomware, it's the easy one here to talk about, and people know what it is. And it was due to a 0-day vulnerability that Microsoft hadn't fixed yet. You're kind of screwed. But then if it was Linux, you can't, there's no one to sue. You see what I mean? You've got...
I think it's going to be an interesting one. I mean, I want to be fair to Microsoft and other vendors, that there are 0 days you just can't plan for. Like, some things just aren't detectable at production and QA, and that's just the nature of software. But those things that are deemed to be detectable, like silly vulnerabilities, or having one skeleton key that's poorly protected that gives somebody who may compromise it access to every customer instance. These are things you shouldn't be doing. And I'm talking about those slam dunk cases where you're like, really, Microsoft? Really, Adobe? Really, whoever the software provider is? I think that's where we're going to see CISOs, and I hope and I would be one of them, that would put their feet to the fire and say, no, as my failure was as a result of your failure, and you should have detected this because of the type of failure it was. So I think legal teams are going to be very, very busy, and probably are going to be the biggest beneficiary of this process, because there's going to be a lot of litigation when the first cases come to the European courts.
There you go. Anybody watching here with a legal background, Richard Cassidy says it, come into cyber legal practice, because you are going to be really busy. And I do agree. I think, I find the whole kind of third-party chain a really tough one, because the third party of a third party, there was a big integrator recently who had the same problem. It was a third party of their third party who got, so who gets the fine, and how is that pushed down? So your cyber liability lawyers are going to be, oh man, I'm going to go and do a law degree. I think that's my next phase of my career.
I couldn't agree more. But so I suppose there's probably a good time to pivot into NIS2, right? And so if we look at NIS2, the indicators are from the EU that there's going to be about 160,000 companies across 15 sectors affected. I think it's going to be way more companies personally, but okay, we'll have to take their lead on that. And so fines are similar, right up to 10 million euro if you fail to reach compliance on NIS2. And they say there's 10 minimum measures that the organization needs to implement. And of course, the deadline is October this year. Now, I have heard grumblings from various contacts within the regulation industry that they may move this out to align with DORA. I think I would
That
be very
makes
smart.
sense.
Yeah, I think companies need extra time, and not just around the contract stuff we talked about, but if you're hit by DORA and NIS2, you've got a big task ahead of you. If you haven't started already 8+ months ago, I don't think anybody's going to be really in a position to say that they're there. But what's interesting is there is some goodness for those that have gone down the ISO 27001 route. If you've gone down that route, then you'll be the estimates are from the consultancies 70% of the way there in terms of NIS2 directive alignment. So that's good news if you're ISO 27001. If you're not ISO 27001, then you might have a bit more work to do. What I like about NIS2 is it gets nice and clear now, because NIS, the original one, was very ambiguous. There was a lot of ambiguity on what organizations were implicated, and then how would you apply the directives and so on and so forth. No, NIS2's gone, no. There's essential, critical, and important businesses, and if you fall into either category, you've got different requirements that will fall upon you. But here's the beauty of NIS2. Very similar to DORA, as I said earlier. There's 5 domains. There's security requirements, incident handling, continuity of service, monitoring, audit, and testing, and compliance with international standards. 3 of those particularly are almost a mirror of what DORA is asking. Security requirements and one of the others, security requirements and monitoring, audit, and testing are slightly nuanced between DORA and NIS2, but the rest, they're pretty much carbon copies. If you've got one, you've got the other.
Yeah.
So that's the good news for those organizations that are hit by both. Obviously, if you just apply, and this just applies to you in NIS2 in this case, then, it's the same approach. Look at the domains, do an analysis of those domains in terms of maturity. And so for example, a lot of organizations ask, how do I do this? There's already DORA Certified Compliance Officer certifications and NIS2 Certified Compliance Officer certifications, which, James, is probably a great opportunity for you in all respects, because people are crying out for those types of individuals to come in and just do the analysis. And so, I don't want to talk too much on this section, but there's a lot of similarities. There's 5 key domains. There are certifications that organizations can go get to go and do the gap analysis and then apply what am I missing? How do I get those bridges gapped?
Now, there is one area of NIS2, and I believe it's probably going to, if it's not already in DORA, it probably will be relatively soon. I think it is actually. Information sharing. Now, all the rest of it, if you've got good governance, you know what you're doing, you've got good qualified information security professionals supporting you and all the rest of it, most of it is easily done, or it's already probably being done. Maybe a few things will need, pepping up. But if it's, they've got the budget, they've done the job and maintained it's really good. The problem is the information sharing section. I don't see how that's going to work, because businesses do not want to talk about the nuances of their breaches. I mean, I did a talk a little while back at one of the events where we talked about information sharing and threat intelligence. I still see this as a big sticking point, because InfoSec people talk really well, do talk. We talk behind the scenes about things that we've experienced in our organizations. We do share information. Okay, we sanitize a lot of it. But I don't think they're just talking about that. They're talking about, establishing information sharing frameworks within member states, and public-private partnerships for sharing threat intelligence. How's that going to be achieved?
Yeah, it's the one that I certainly get most of the commentary on around. We don't think, organizations are saying, we don't feel it's possible, not at the level that NIS2 is requiring it. So we're talking, for the listeners and viewers, specifically about Article 29, I believe, cybersecurity information sharing arrangements. And this is where NIS2 is saying that there needs to be a process in place to share cybersecurity information, things about threats, impending threats, activity across member states and also across organizations within the EU as well. And that's a big ask, because we're already struggling to consume the data that's been shared inbound. Now we've got to assimilate that and push it back out in a way that doesn't put us more at risk potentially. And that's a tricky one. So I think the way that it should be done will be in some levels of obfuscation, okay, or obfuscation, where you're able to say, you don't necessarily need to mention your business name. But there needs to be a platform capability where you can say, I am company X, and I operate in the Netherlands. I've seen these following indicators of attack or compromises or activities, which I deem to be of high risk based upon the NIS2 framework or directive, and share it out in a repository that can be absorbed and assimilated by other organizations. And by the way, this does happen already a lot in the financial sector. There's a lot of great collaboration across the financial sector in doing this already. But NIS2 covers a vast range of organization types that aren't used to this type of collaboration. And there needs to be a level of automation, which is written into Article 29, that's really going to push the boundaries of what some of these organizations are used to. So I think there has to be a platform which, obfuscates or obfuscates the source of the data, but still gives the tangible, salient data points that can be consumed by another organization to give them early warnings that there's something that they need to be able to analyze and go and discover. So I think that's how it should be done. I don't think it's wise to lift the hood and tell every member state information sharing who you are, the raw data, that exposes your business anymore that's already been exposed. So I think that's the way it should be done. But again, there's no real definition of the types of platforms and the ways that it will be implemented. So, I do say NIS2 has removed ambiguity. There are still some levels of ambiguity left in NIS2.
No, I agree. I think it's a positive step, both of these, NIS2, for those of you out there at the moment, it's kind of healthcare, it's energy, it's transport. Banking is in there as well, financial market stuff, but digital infrastructure and public administrations, which is obviously government-based, services, that kind of thing, are all kind of covered in that wider scope of NIS2. I don't know why they just don't combine the bloody thing, to be totally honest. It's not that different, as you say, and it's all good stuff. The risk management and reporting, the governance, the accountability has always been a bit of a hot potato. Who is accountable? Penalties enforcement are going to enforce that, but information sharing, I do find that pretty tough. I'll be honest. I don't know how they're going to do that.
Yeah, I don't know either. And one of the metrics, which is even more of a beacon of warning to organizations, is again based upon some of the big consultancies' view of if you were to go from zero to hero on any regulation, what's the average time it takes? And the analysis suggests 12 to 18 months. So and I really hope the people listening or watching this are not that have already started at least some of the analysis around where the gaps lie and what where they need to bridge those gaps. But because 12 to 18 months just to get from zero to here, that's a very dire situation to be in when you think about, if it is October and maybe it does slip to January, even then that's less than 6 months, just over 6 months away. So, really is time to get your skates on. And actually, here's the interesting thing as well. The vendor industry has a lot to answer for here as well. So what I mean by that is, it shouldn't be, the onus shouldn't just be on the customers to work this out. They should be going to the vendors that they use. And we're not just talking third parties, but the software vendors, the infrastructure vendors, whoever they are, and saying, how do you help me align to DORA, to NIS2? Show me where your technology gives me, 10%, 20, 100% alignment. Show me exactly what technology elements do that, because I believe a lot of it's on the vendor shoulders as well to demonstrate how they help organizations and customers get there. And so I really hope that businesses that are going on these journeys aren't doing it alone. They are bringing the vendors to the table, and they're pressing the flesh on, right, show me what you do and help me, with these technologies align to what I need to align to. Never fail alone, right? Never fail alone. That's just common sense in business, overall.
Okay. Final question to you, Richard. Do you think it's going to stop at Europe? This is obviously, if this legislation comes in and it works out really, really well, and I do believe it will, I think there's going to be a few very frightening times for a few first early organizations that fall foul of it. But do you think it's going to kind of spread as a requirement into places like the US. Obviously, they'll have their own flavor. They always like to do that. But, is this the standard for InfoSec that we're looking at going forward?
Yeah, I think so. And DORA does. By the way, let's talk about the US because it's probably and China are also part of this. But gosh, I hope I haven't upset the algorithm, James. But those countries, so DORA does impact North American companies. Whilst it is an EU regulation, US organizations that offer financial services within the EU provide third-party services, back to that point, to EU financial companies are impacted by DORA. And this is what I love about DORA. It's saying, listen, come and transact in the EU, but if you transact with an EU finance company, we will be able to come to you and say, how are you aligning to the DORA regulation articles and sub-articles? And if they don't meet a minimum standard, there is powers to disrupt those operations. So it is already taking a global effect, specifically within DORA. NIS2 less so. NIS2 is more about what we're doing in EU. But I think it's obvious that that's also going to take a rather global view as it starts to get more embedded and they go through the iterations of it. So to answer your question, absolutely, we're going to see these things become much more globally impacted, and the onus will be on other nations to show how they comply so that ultimately the EU remains as safe as it possibly can, both operational and cybersecurity-wise.
It's going to be an interesting 6 months, I can tell you that. And you're absolutely right. Because the other thing to bear in mind, I mean, depending upon where you are in the world, budgets are assigned either in kind of like December/January or kind of April, depending upon when your new financial year starts. And if you haven't done your analysis on DORA and where you stand with it before that budgetary renewal, then you might find you don't have enough budget, or you might be coming back for more budget in order to meet that requirement and obligation going forward. So even more of a reason to check it out now rather than wait until December. You haven't really got a lot of time then. So it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, Richard, we've reached the top end of our time together again. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great to get your insight. Is there anything you want to plug or anything that you're going to be doing for that you want to kind of mention to the listeners?
Look, I love to get out and see customers. If there are anybody listening to this, James, and they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't consider half the things or all or some of the things that we discussed. I'm all about peer-led information sharing and helping everybody get to a point of goodness. So, do reach out to me directly. I work at Rubrik, so it's not too hard to track me down, and can reach out to James as well. Really happy to tell you what I've seen, the good, bad, and the ugly. And if that helps you get somewhere, more down the line and closer to the deadlines and meeting them, great. Other than that, stay tuned for more decent podcasts and updates.
Thank you very much. And to all of you listening or watching out there, depending upon the medium you're on, it's been absolutely fantastic to go over this. I dare say we're going to be covering this subject matter a few more times over the next couple of months. And next time, I think what I'll do is I'll pull Paul in as well. So me, you, Richard, and Paul can kind of sit down and really kind of get to grips with it. Maybe we'll do a slightly longer two-parter on that one, because I think, once that standard has been finalized, because as I said, I think Paul told me that soon there's another set of requirements or additions that a revision, I don't know what they call it, is coming out soon. So maybe we'll book that in. And thank you for listening or even watching the latest edition of Razorwire. It's always good to get feedback. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us via LinkedIn or through our website, www.razorthorn.com. If you feel that there's something that we should cover maybe a little bit more in depth, a new topic, or something of interest to you or the community at large, we'll even do interviews. If you've got any recommendations or you want us to interview people, we'll reach out to those individuals and see if we can get them on camera, so we can ask them the important questions about InfoSec. So it'd be great to see what your feedback is. In addition, I do have a book recently come out, the Cyber Sentinels Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals at all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of lots of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again. Look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.